Continue to focus on one of our leading stories this Tuesday. Naledi residents in Soweto want justice, they say, for 5 children who died, allegedly after consuming food from a local spaza shop. So let's unpack what it is that you need to do in the event of suspected food poisoning. Dr. Gerhard Verdoom is a toxicologist at Griffin Poison Information Center. Dr. Verdoom, thank you for talking to us this afternoon. Such an incredibly important discussion. How do I know, as a parent, that what my child is suffering from is potentially food poisoning when I imagine the symptoms look very much like gastro or perhaps stomach flu?
Well, I think there's a grave misperception in the country about food poisoning, because we've heard over the last sort of 18 months to 2 years of many incidents where people are suspected of being poisoned by foodstuffs. Now, poisoning can mean 2 things. It can either be the typical Clostridium type or Salmonella type of food poisoning because food has gone off. Is of even more grave concern is when a pesticide is in that particular foodstuff. So you never actually know as a parent what the situation is, because whether it is a bacterial food poisoning or whether it's a chemical food poisoning, the symptoms are very much the same. The difference is that with a typical bacterial food poisoning, there's a long time before the symptoms start coming to the fore. It can be anything from 2 hours to 4 hours after the person ate the food. Whereas in the case of a chemical poisoning, where the food is laced with a poison, the onset of symptoms is rapid. It can be anything from 5 minutes up to half an hour, and the symptoms are normally much more severe than in the case of a typical food poisoning. And with a typical food poisoning with a bacterial infection, we seldom, if ever, lose a patient. But in the case of a chemical poisoning, there is a grave danger of the person actually dying because of the chemical toxin which is in that foodstuff.
Right. So that's an incredibly important distinction to make, particularly for the purposes of our discussion around these 5 children who died as a result, allegedly, of from eating a suspected sort of toxic food from a local spaza shop. Because as you're saying, Dr. Verdoom, and I think that we need to emphasize this fact, eating something that is potentially expired is one thing. Eating something that potentially contains a toxin, as an example, rat poison, is a completely different issue.
Yeah, totally different. And again, you mentioned the word rat poison there. The rat poisons in the country will never, ever get an acute response. Never. The response will only come in 2 days after you've ingested the stuff. So what people normally refer to in the common terms nowadays as a rat poison is what we call the illegal street pesticides. Mostly things like aldicarb, sometimes carbofuran, and what we see increasingly is also turbifos. And if people eat food that have that as a contaminant or that was deliberately put into the food, the onset of symptoms with aldicarb and turbifos or something like carbofuran is immediate. It is literally within 4 to 5 minutes and with severe symptoms and severe consequences. Whereas if your child eats normally and the child starts complaining about stomach cramps or a bit nausea, dizziness and a bit of vomiting 2 hours later, that is a typical bacterial poisoning. That's not life-threatening. But when it comes to what we refer to now as a rat poison, which is not rat poison, but an illegal pesticide, that's immediate. And the risk is absolutely severe of actually passing away within anything from half an hour up to 4 hours of ingesting that poisoned food.
Sure. And Dr. Verdoom, in the context of a spaza shop, would those pesticides typically, in your experience, be used perhaps to keep pests at bay, rats, for example?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is used in the spaza shops. It is sold by the spaza shops. It's also sold by street vendors. And what I find myself when I go out the streets or I go into close to the taxi ranks, you find these people sitting there with those pesticides, either as a neat pesticide in a small sachet they sell as a rat poison, in inverted commas, or they even sometimes mix the stuff with maize meal to make better money out of it, because then you dilute it with maize meal, which is cheap, and you get more money for the quantity of chemical you dispense. Now, people buy that, take it home, or they buy food from a spaza shop where the chemical actually contaminates a lot of food stuff like noodles or maize meal or even fresh commodities, and unknowingly they then cook the food and they ingest the poison. And that's how these chemicals get into the bodies of not only children but also adults. And it comes back to the point that it is 99.9% illegal chemicals which are brought in from foreign nations like Zimbabwe in particular and from Mozambique, and then sold in spaza shops and by street vendors and contaminating the food, or it is in a commodity like maize meal. And people don't see it in the maize meal because it's very few granules in there, but it's enough. If you make a maize porridge with that and feed it to the children will suffer severe consequences or might even pass away after eating that poisoned food.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, are these pesticides legal for ultimately what is domestic use?
Not at all. Not at all. LD-carb has been banned by the Registrar of Act number 36 1947 since September 2016. I actually asked him to ban the possession of it because I've seen so many human mortalities because of it. But despite that, we still see loads of it coming in from Zimbabwe with all the undocumented foreign nationals. And what we see also, turbifos is legal in terms of using it on agricultural farms, for example, to kill nematodes in potatoes and cash crops like maize. But to sell it in a spaza shop in a small unlabeled package is completely unlawful. That cannot be condoned by anybody because the law is completely against it. But unfortunately, with the crime syndicates in the country and with the lawlessness in the country, we've seen more and more of these chemicals in the hands of people that should not even be close to her, let alone having it in a spaza shop or a street vendor's place, or then mixing it up with maize meal and very often contaminating foodstuff like we saw 2 or 3 years ago in the Eastern Cape, where noodles were laced with turbifos and the children passed away within an hour and a half. So it is of grave concern to me as a toxicologist and running a poison center when I get the call and people think it's food poisoning, and I know for a fact it is actually a LD-carb or an organophosphate like turbifos. And you tell the parents, if you don't get to an hospital within 50 minutes, that child will pass away. So these things happen on a day-to-day basis. And what we heard in Soweto now is, I think, a good thing to hear about it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of underreporting. And we see more and more of these things happening in the country. So it's a case of we have to take hands with society and the law enforcement agencies, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, and the police to get rid of all these street pesticides because it's posing a severe risk to our poor people in the country.
Yeah. So ultimately, you know, when we're talking, Dr. Verdoom, about health inspectors doing more regular checks, it's not quite that simple, right? There's a very particular issue that we need to be drilling down to, and it's the use of these illegal pesticides.
It's impossible for the Department of Health and for the police and for the Department of Agriculture that have inspectors that do work. All of those departments are totally under-resourced. They can't expect the entire country to be covered by policemen and by inspectors from the Department of Health and Labor and Department of Agriculture to go out to all the street vendors and to all the spaza shops they go inspect. They do it, but they totally overloaded with work. So we need to enforce it through, call it lobbying that we do right now through your TV channel, to tell our normal people out there, don't buy anything which is not in a legal container with a legal registration number from the Department of Agriculture. So don't buy anything which is sold by a street vendor or by a spaza shop, because most of these spaza shops are run by foreign nationals who don't care about our people. They don't know about the laws of the country. They don't know about responsible pesticide sales, and they sell anything they get their hands on, which is mostly illegal, and they are threatening the lives of our poor people in the country. So we need to get it out as a public outreach from all of us to our members of society to say, don't buy these things because you are threatening your life. You're threatening your family's life. You're going to kill your own dog. You're going to kill your own children. If you have a problem with rodents, buy a normal rodenticide from a normal shop, which is in a box with directions for use. All the safety measures are there, and use a bait station. But if you buy something in a little packet, which is black or brown granules, you are going to kill somebody, or you are going to kill your own dog. And then you're going to be up for murder. And the sad thing is, the children are the ones dying. In the past 2 years, I cannot tell you how many young children died because of being exposed to LD-carb and turbifos in the country because of it being available in the hands of spaza shops and street vendors. I now myself have taken away literally kilograms of this stuff from street vendors and from spaza shops with the help of the police sometimes, and even on my own sometimes, without any authorization, because I can just see a calamity coming down upon our poor people in the country. So they are the ones taking the brunt of illegal activity.
Yeah, a sharp warning there for all of us. Do not buy pesticides that are not properly labeled, especially from a corner store. It is incredibly dangerous. Just a last question for you, Dr. Verdoom. If indeed we are able to catch someone in the midst of this kind of poisoning by one of these illegal pesticides, you were telling us that the symptoms are essentially immediately onset, within minutes. Is it still possible to save a life if you act as soon as you can?
Yeah, if you can, if the person has vomiting, which normally happens, it's a good thing to get it out of the system, but then you need to get the patient to medical treatment as soon as possible. Even if it's just a normal clinic or a normal doctor or a hospital, but you need to get the patient to medical treatment because they need to induce or they need to break the poisoning with an antidote, or they need to put the poison on the person on drip. If you don't get that patient to hospital, the chance of survival of that poor patient is virtually nothing. So it's very, very important.
Yeah, incredibly important message. Dr. Gerhard Verdoom is a toxicologist at Griffin Poison Information Center. It's a story we're tracking for you in the wake of these 5 children who died allegedly after eating snacks from a local spaza shop. Important information there. If you or a loved one do experience these symptoms and there are sort of sudden onset symptoms, get to a hospital as soon as you can.